to the office hours of the Open LMS community. I always love that, our streaming platform provider requires that you start your meeting just, a few seconds before. So you tell everybody to be here at 4:00, I guess my time, 5:00 Eastern. But we have to kind of riff for 20 seconds or so until it's up. There it is. We're on live. So welcome everyone. If you are watching this and it's in recorded fashion, I just want to give you a shout out that any comments that you put in or any notes that you put in, we do see them, right? We see them on YouTube, we see them on Facebook, we see them on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to respond, or we'd love to engage with you in that way. My name's Stephen Laddick. Why don't you introduce yourself, Christian?
Well, I'm Chris. It's hard to remember my role. It's digital community and initiatives coordinator. I think I got it
You are the
mostly right.
master of all things when it comes to making us look great. All right, nice. And I am the principal of eLearning advocacy over at Open LMS, this company right here. And we're here to have office hours. This is something that we do every Wednesday, right around this time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. Although, we might shift it around every now and then, but this is the time we wanted to choose. We felt like, it's a nice way to end your day or start your day if you're on the other side of the planet. And today, while we either see or wait or engage with other people's comments, again, you can find us on LinkedIn, you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on Facebook. While we see, what kind of questions our community may have this week, we wanted to talk about two things. One is that we just released a fantastic interview with a woman named Kathy Fletcher, who is with OpenStax. She is the director of Fate, which I'm going to let Chris talk about what that means, which is fantastic. And just kind of want to walk through some pieces of that conversation because it's really, really cool. There you go. The fate of open educational resources. And then we also want to talk about something that's near and dear to our heart because it is the focus of the eLearn Success Series first session, which is coming up in just a month and a half on February 23rd. The design session is on February 23rd, and it is about, instructional design, for lack of a better term, right? It is how do we design engaging, effective, successful learning experiences, especially in this online learning format. Chris, anything else that you want to put on the table before we get started?
No, I have to say that I had fun writing this title, like the fate, that it actually means fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics. And I mean, there is a relationship between faith, like actual faith, and these four words. And it's really interesting that an organization, especially one that is really at the forefront of its niche, of its game, which is open educational resources, is being like so conscious about it. So that's interesting. I think in education we always have this issue of making things cooler than they have a right to be sometimes.
Oh, wow. You better unpack that one there. What do you mean?
Yeah, like, I mean, there is this stereotype of the teacher who wants to be cool and then kind of fails at it, but that's fine because that turns him like a kind of a likable character.
Okay.
And I think there's lots of teachers like that, or even a lot of people relate to that image. I think I do sometimes with like my younger family. But I think it's fair because personally, like the question is, how do we make fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics something cool or something important? Like that.
I mean, I'll throw out another word too. I mean, just something normal, right? I mean, isn't it interesting in a world where, wouldn't it be interesting to live in a world where these four qualities are just that normal? That's what we would expect, from, product design or customer service or, just interactions in teams and those kinds of things. So, and especially in a learning environment, right? Like that's a that's something that I think more and more it's just becoming something that we are creating the expectation around. I was actually, I love that it came together as fate. I wonder, I mean, how planned was that? Do you think they came up with the acronym, or do you think that they,
No,
no?
and
Oh, I think
full
Chris,
disclosure, that
Mhm.
acronym, so uh, just trying to look cool to make it cool. Oh,
Hey, whatever we can do. Tell me, you listened to the podcast, and I love that you pulled out the story about how the role for Catherine kind of came about. Can you just sort of give a recap of where did that, why was her, position created at all? When you remember the genesis?
I do remember that she began as the chief technology actually at OpenStack. So
Mhm.
it's an interesting switch because I don't know, for a role like that, you would expect someone more like from HR or something more related to ethics and so on. But I think it makes the case that technology has a lot of say in these kinds of conversations about equity, about inclusion, even about justice.
Mhm.
Which brings me to something that's interesting that I think a catalyst for this increased importance of faith, the acronym at OpenStax, was the events in Minneapolis, and was it last year or what a
Mm,
year?
thr
Yeah.
Mhm. It was already 3 years ago, yeah. Mhm.
Oh yeah, Mhm. With the death of George Floyd, and
Mhm.
it's also interesting that they are um, open about that this was a fact, because it led them to reconsider, like, who are we are creating amazing great free content ready for everyone, for every teacher to use in every classroom, but who are we really speaking to, right?
Mhm.
Are we really
Mhm.
connecting with, and if are we really giving them the tool that they actually need? um, so I guess it's very interesting to me. And when it comes to these issues that we are sort of focusing this time, which is design or learning design, it's interesting to see, like, when we create products and when we design them and when we build technology that supports those products, is it who is taken into consideration?
Mhm.
So
And that was part of the foundation as well. I mean, the Genesis was George Floyd, and those conversations that were happening, like, OpenStax really took that to heart, that situation, and wanted to look, they put the mirror up for themselves. And then she also talks about, how they were doing a lot of tests with AI and machine learning and whatnot. And they started asking the question of, you know, are we just letting, are we just sort of letting the machine run the future, or are we going to be very intentional about what happens there? So I thought that was really, I love intentionality, and I love really conscious choices like that, because it's so often in our world the default is, efficiency and scale and, growth for growth's sake, rather than saying, look, we can be successful and we can deliver high quality, and we can be, you know and we can be very intentional about what we want, what we're offering to the public there. um
absolutely, and I think that's a conversation that needs to happen more when it comes to technology, and especially like algorithms and machine learning, uh, because there is like a very strong movement of people who are just against it, for
well
lack of a better word, like
hmm
Luddites about these topics in education, like as an active part of educating a young mind. But the truth is, they're not going anywhere.
right.
So I guess the solution is exactly what you mentioned:
Right,
intentionality.
and I mean, it's not even just young minds. I mean, we've seen so much, I mean, come out of the last 2 or 3 years here in terms of understanding how these algorithms have manipulated or changed, or, definitely put people in bubbles around, in social media, and, they've shaped the, political conversations, and really it's just you're either fascinated by it or you're terrified by it, right? And so, and both of those can have, different meanings, right? So, yeah, and ultimately, when we talk about, I just say like the young learners are definitely something that we really want to pay attention to for sure. But there are plenty of adult learners, right? I mean, everyone who's in university, they are adult learners, and technically, right? They're the next generation of the workforce, and then the workforce itself that's out there. They've millennials, they've been a part of this for a long time. So one of the things that you've mentioned already, actually, in our company at OpenLMS, is something that I love, and it's also, but you've really actually brought it in, and they've now actually over at OpenStax have implemented something called an equity pause, which it's just super cool. And why don't you explain that? It's something you're kind of passionate about.
Yeah, and it's I love it because it's so simple and brilliant, and it's just whenever you have a meeting, especially if it's like a product development meeting or a creation meeting, when you are doing something that's going to be received by somebody else, make sure that at some point during that meeting, say 25-30 minutes in, you make an equity pause. So what is an equity pause? It's basically asking the question, who is, now, are we considering everyone who we should be considering as an audience, as a target? Are we doing enough to get them involved into what we're doing? I guess that's it. There could be more questions related to that, but basically these two can be just powerful, like can give you like a switch of the mindset where we're going. And personally, I think we can really enrich whatever you're building. And I think it's going to inform a lot of what we are doing for the coming months. At least I hope so. And that's
Yeah,
exciting.
absolutely. I'm actually just I'm thinking myself right now. I'm taking an equity pause myself, and do you remember? She was the 5th episode. A woman named Brittany Smith. Do you remember that episode that we had on the podcast?
Yeah.
She
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
fantastic. You just kind of made me think about, like how do we call this out? Like I just remember Brittany Smith. She was the 5th episode on the eLearning podcast. So this is back in September. It was published on September 8th of 2020. I just looked it up, and she goes by wanderingbrit.com. Maybe we'd love to circle back and see what she's doing now. But she had this series of books that she is an educator, and she just really brought the spotlight to diversity and the spotlight to characters in books that were not non-traditional, as we would say. But why not? Why are they not traditional? Why are they not being held up in normal? As normal heroines and heroes and those kinds of things from different cultures, from different backgrounds, from different places. Just really cool conversation with Brittany there.
Yeah, I think just very shortly. I think when you interviewed her, she was a teacher, like
Yep,
an elementary teacher in New Jersey, if I'm correct.
in New Jersey. Yeah.
But now she's like a digital nomad, and
Oh,
she's just
really?
traveling, writing, and she has all these things.
Good for her.
Yeah, yeah.
Wonder if
But
she's
she
down here in
came.
Mexico with the other 2,000, 3,000, actually like 10,000, people in her same age bracket that I see wandering on Condesa or Roma Norte. That's fantastic. Good for her. Way to go. Just want to remind everybody right now, if you happen to be watching this, if you happen to tune in here, this is something we call office hours. It's from OpenLMS, this company right here. You see on my screen. And it's also, I guess it's probably pretty hard to see over there. But Chris and I both work for OpenLMS. We were formerly with LMS Pulse. And so office hours is an extension of the OpenLMS e-learning community. It's the e-learning community powered by OpenLMS. It's a place that's got, close to 2,000, several thousand people who are passionate about e-learning. And we talk about all things e-learning. So is it design? Is it how you instruct? Is it the actual technology? Is it data science? Is it whatever? And it's something that we invite everybody to come be a part of. You can come join us at community.openlms.net, or you can see down there at the bottom at the screen down there, bit.ly/eLearning community. And you have to actually, it's case sensitive. So you might want to make sure that you type that in correctly. But since we are live and we're office hours, if you have a question, if you are someone who is an e-learning professional, if you are a instructional designer, or maybe you teach classes, maybe you have a master class, maybe you are building a new piece of technology, we'd love to hear from you, not only questions, but just success stories, challenges, observations, all those kinds of good things. And if you're not listening live right now, if you're watching the recording, still put your comments in the chat, because we do see them and we will respond. It's great stuff. So our podcast this week was with Catherine Fletcher over at OpenStax, but we also wanted to focus on something that is really important to both of us, because on February 23rd is the eLearn Success Series. It's the first session in that 4-part series on instructional design. And we want to talk about some design trends. So I see that you have already pulled up some design trends, my friend. What are your top design trends? What do you think is cool in e-learning for design right now?
Mm-hmm.
Let's not say cool. What's effective? Effective is more important than cool. Cool gets eyeballs. Effective gets completions and actual learning outcomes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just this inner dilemma of making screen addicted teens pay attention to me for a few seconds. That's all it comes from. So I pulled up a couple of trends, like high performing articles on e-learning trends. I think there's a lot of commonalities. So I just picked some of them that were like common. So here it is, and I think this is very straightforward, and it's the fact that we now have to design for a hybrid, workforce, or a hybrid model. I think there's like an extreme version of it where we don't really know if next week classes are going to be face-to-face or online. And
hey,
ideally,
I got to break in there. I got to attest, like literally, we're recording this live 6 hours ago. My wife and I got a notice from the school of our kids saying, "Hey, guess what? We have to go online, we're going to go online for the next 4 school days." Happily, in our case, it's because they're giving all of the teachers and staff booster shots. But you got to be like, boom, we're going to have to literally all of the teachers have to be prepared in a 24-hour period or less, actually, to have the infrastructure in place, have a class ready to go. We have to be ready to be able to accommodate them, our work schedules and our those kinds of things. So hybrid is normal. It's a reality. I want to also give a shout out to Ryan Hexpour. Thanks for joining us. Hey, good to see you. So anyway, Chris, you were saying hybrid. Go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit like at the beginning of the boom of the smartphone, of the iPhone, like pretty much, and all of the followers. And the topic of responsive web design came up, because before we didn't really care about screen sizes. We just assumed they're all like these big rectangles, so all the content was there. But suddenly there was a bunch of little screens where content were accessible. So I don't really know who I should study more of that, but suddenly there was this trend of trying to make content fit within that screen, and later on just how to make the same piece of content, the same design, fit on every screen. So content that automatically resizes. So I do see that parallel. Can we make content or experiences even that are resizable?
Sorry, I think we lost you for just a second there. I think the interwebs played a trick on us. But you're talking about responsive design and how the content had to be available both in a desktop or a laptop format, tablet, and a mobile phone format. And it's I wanted to take your thought one step further, and in that it's not just about making sure the content shows up on each different screen, but it's actually rethinking the experience in each platform, right? Like the experience that someone will have or may have on a desktop or a laptop is fundamentally different, or could be fundamentally different. I mean, I'm probably standing in, in a park or somewhere else, or I'm not standing at a desk. I'm not sitting kind of there if I'm on a mobile device. Whereas if I'm sitting in front of a laptop, I am. And it's really interesting because one of the things I find, and I'm going to put you on the spot here because I'm interested in this.
Mhm.
Something that's also now kind of playing with the same parallel that you've started with, sort of, hey, we've got to be ready for hybrid. Online learning has to be a part of every sort of consideration, business continuity, etc. There is an interesting pendulum, I think, swinging back the other way, in that the pandemic 20 months ago required everyone to jump online and like just sort of, we were trying to meet these demands of everyone. Whereas I feel like there's starting to be a pullback where it's like, look, we could try to meet everyone's needs everywhere. And I'm not talking about accessibility here, right? Like that's a totally different conversation about accessibility. But what I'm trying to say is it's going to be really interesting to see how educators and education professionals kind of say, no, look, we know what best practices are in terms of synchronous or asynchronous learning. And so we're not going to necessarily give you a self-paced course, or we are, and I sort of taking back some of the power from the masses that says, look, we want all the options all the time. I'm just interested to see if that happens. Do you think that's going to, do you see that playing out, or am I making that up?
I don't know if it's going to be massive, but personally, I would love it if it were kind of like that. And actually, there is a trend that we'll get into later on. It reminds me of a session that we had last year on the summit. Um, this woman from, oh my God, and she was on the podcast too. But she basically made a case that when we're talking about learning experience, it's very different from just user experience in general, because in learning we need to put like deliberate challenges or difficulties, because that's kind of an element in learning. So, and I think we've seen it in many ways, like with MOOCs and so on, that if we give the student all of the content all the time just ready, it's not going to lead to skills, to new learning necessarily. So I do think there's quite a few people who agree with you, and hopefully a lot more creators and developers are going to take advantage of that, and actually kind of take a stand. Like say we could do it self-paced, we could give you all the content, and we're not going to do it not because we want to make more money or so, no, but because we think it's the best experience for you. And I don't know. I think it takes also like um, some faith on the part of the learner or the whoever purchases this content, uh, to follow them and say, okay, I hear you. You're not going to give us everything we want, but because you think it's for the best, so let's follow your lead and see what happens.
Yeah, agreed. All right, take us to the next design trend that you have seen out there or seeing. And I'd see it on the screen there, content curation. I personally love this one. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think it's again entirely direct related to Kathy's interview, because OpenStack, that's what it does. It provides content, it curates content, and it reminds us of our director Phil Miller, because he mentioned the other day that there are ways, like unintuitive ways, in which we can bring innovation into our organization. And I think this could be one, because when you stop thinking of the teacher or the educator department as someone who is tasked with creating content, but rather someone who is able to procure the best content. And by that, I mean the best format, the best technology, the best modalities, and so on. That could really turn like the experience of learning. I'm thinking of corporate learning mostly, but I think it applies to all kinds,
Mm.
uh, where the team is no longer just focusing on developing PowerPoints or cartoons or just these voiceovers or all the things that are common in when you create content in corporate learning, but rather teams that are more thoughtful of what is the best content and who can provide its best. And we'd rather stop thinking of whether the content works or not. So they spend more time like analyzing results and the relationship of the content with the students rather than creating content over and over.
Mm. I think the, you know, it's not parallel, but it's you know, something that goes hand in hand with what you're saying about curating content is the use of content libraries, right? And the use of essentially what you just ended with right there, not necessarily creating new material every time that you're teaching a subject, unless of course something you're teaching is absolutely new and completely unique, and you know this is the first time the universe has seen it. But in so many cases, you know, do you really need to redo you know, the quadratic equation? We probably got a lot of material on that out there, you know, and so it's pulling the best you know, best content around the quadratic equation, or you know,
Yeah.
the history of South Africa, or you know, whatever, right? And uh, using that to your advantage as an educator, rather than you know, getting in your own way basically, and having, you know, sort of thinking that you need to recreate the wheel every single time. I think that's a huge part of curation. It's also, you know, reaching out and building those libraries and having those libraries be accessible. And then you're really updating the library, right? To make sure that that's which is, again, it's funny. It's the parallel that goes back to OpenStax, where that's what they're, you know, that's what they're doing with all their content, right? They're kind of just re-looking at it and rethinking, how can we present this through an equity lens kind of thing. Cool.
Yeah,
What's your next
exactly.
design?
And I think you had
Oh,
no, you had a debate or an interview a while back, but I don't remember which one, uh, where there was this sort of this debate. We don't need every high school math teacher to create a high school math book or a high school math lesson, like the content. Um, but it is good that there is like a couple of different alternatives or different perspectives around the same subject. So I think in a way, the term is like specialization. Some teachers are better
mhm.
at creating great content, great video. I think YouTube has allowed these creators to blossom. But there's going to be always just a handful of like perfect or amazing content, and then all the rest of the resources should not focus on creating more, but just making the best use of it in every specific case, in every high school.
100%.
Um, which kind of leads me to this next trend, and I don't know if you should call it a trend, but basically it's the principle of the awareness that people may be too tired to learn, or too busy, or too jaded,
Mm.
or yeah, there's a lot of burnout, or a lot of talk about burnout. So learning should not add to that. Ideally, should be the contrary, right?
That's really
So
interesting.
it would be
This is
interesting.
a nice one. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I don't really have like a clear way forward to see like what properties or what attributes should content or the experiences should have to be aware of this. So it would be interesting to see what creators, what educators come up with to ease
Hmm.
these burdens, at least like psychologically.
You know, it's very interesting. I don't have an, I'm not, haven't really thought about this one so much, other than, this is my gut reaction to it is that it's really interesting. And, I think the reality is that yes, people are, especially, you know, in today's world, like I know, for example, you know, one of the things that kind of happened as the universe started opening up from the pandemic over the last 6 months, at least here in our world, I remember this very clearly from my wife, was that, you know, she went from, you know, tons and tons of Zoom calls every day with her teams and her colleagues and whatnot to in-person meetings, and people didn't necessarily make the switch back to the reality of, hey, you've got to travel between meetings and there's got to be meeting times and there's actual socialization that happens. And people were just stacking meetings, one after the other. And, she was finding herself really just overwhelmed by that outcome from that. And what we've, this overloaded thing is that what we discovered, one of the interesting things that was discovered over the pandemic is that people just they sit there online and they are available, right? So a learner is available to, hey, you just got done with your one meeting. Okay, jump right into the next thing, jump right into the next thing, jump right into the next, and we aren't giving ourselves the space like we used to get up from your desk and go to the water cooler or go get lunch or, go out with some colleagues or, get out of your house and walk the dog. And these, even those little tiny things create that break from, what's going on. And then that's just kind of real easy surface stuff, let alone when you have challenging issues at work or you have challenging issues in your learning environment, those kinds of things. So it's all, this all ties together really well for me. That's really nice. Interesting. And so how will learning design professionals think about that? I really like that. So one of the trends that I'd like to put on the table, because we're coming up the half hour here, is the move from designers as thinking of them as, the people who do the graphics or the people who will put the slides together or whatever, so this has changed very rapidly from, so the people who kind of either tweak or, take the learning content and make it look nice, to full-bodied, very robust project managers. And it's really interesting, especially with the advent and the power of video, audio, virtual reality, hybrid versus in person, this and that, and sort of the speed at which learning is now expected or learning materials are expected. The role of the designer and the instructional design professional as a project manager is really, it's really, you can't emphasize it enough that those, those kinds of skills, the skills of a typical, what you would think is a management consultant, are extremely important. Time management, communication, budgeting, these kinds of things. They're all really, really important pieces of the design profession now. Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, it's always about the soft skills, it seems. Because, I mean, I do see that there is, like, you don't see a finance chief of a company trying to do some advocacy for cutting costs or getting expenses reported and so on, because we've all already agreed that this is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that there is the figure of the chief learning officer, for example. It's been there for a while, but comparatively it's new. So it's good to see that when more organizations send a message that the chief learning officer has a similar role and deserves a similar level of attention and importance. And I think that's also another message from Kathy from OpenStax, that if we have a director of these issues at the top of the table, is because the organization wants them to give them the same kind of importance.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happens, the designers, the content creators, I think they no longer have to be sort of cheerleaders or these people who always have to be pulling people so they get what they need, which I think is fairly common, and rather be a more supportive aspect because it's related to the company's goals, the OKRs or
well, I mean, the whole how big is the, we had Hitachi, whose last name is now, her family name is now escaping me, but she works with Priceline and some of these other large organizations as a learner, and her big message was, the bookings group that owns Priceline, when the pandemic hit, rather than finding learning on the chopping block, they said, look, we're going to triple down, double down, because this is our moment to grow the importance of these people and grow these muscles and find new ways of engaging people and whatnot. And I think that was a really, obviously in hindsight, really intelligent decision. But as you're saying, the chief learning officer sitting in the C-suite now is really, it puts not only the importance on it, but it also shows the importance now that they've termed it the Great Resignation, right? Of, how important is it that your staff and that people see a development path and see the ability to grow and, really have that power to be, again, this is something that's come out of the pandemic, that, people are mobile, right? Like employment, especially in the digital world, is extraordinarily mobile. And so how are you going to make sure that your workers not only stay with you, but just stay engaged and stay excited and whatnot? Sure. Let's move on to these other two, because we could patter on about this forever. But just before we do that, I want to remind everybody, we are live right now. If you're listening to the recording of this, please do put a comment in the, if you're listening to LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, put a comment in there. Tell us about your successes, celebrate your challenges. Maybe you have a question around e-learning, maybe just something that you're super passionate about in e-learning. We will see them. We will respond. Or if you're listening now, we'd love to hear them. We'd love to hear the same thing, because it's always great to hear from our community. I see diversity and inclusion and artificial intelligence, but I mean, those seem like very different topics, but obviously DE&I, it's something we've been talking about for a while now with Kathy, or, our podcast with Kathy and whatnot. That's definitely going to be a big piece. How big do you think AI is going to be? I mean, is it getting bigger? Or is it still, I mean, again, we can point to one of our podcast guests, Natalie from XM Global, XR Global in South Africa. She was able to put together, or she is putting together, artificial intelligence course. So no, I'm talking about something totally different. It's not AI. She's talking about virtual reality. Whoa, totally messed that one up.
But I was reading.
Whoa, definitely need to get some caffeine in me for the afternoon.
Come to Colombia.
Ah!
No, but I see that relation, and I was just reading this article, and it's called Toy Markets, and it says that a lot of companies that are huge today, they started in very small spaces, and they not only absolutely dominated that market, but they expanded it beyond anyone's guesses. And it's funny to see how many founders or startup like entrepreneurs, when they pitch some new idea, they say, "Oh, we're going to target this market, the car market, because it's huge. It has these billions of in sales every year." And it's an easy way to pitch. It's like a safe way to pitch.
Yeah, it's super safe, because you're like, look, there are consumers there, right? There is money to be had there, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whereas, well, Amazon is the perfect example, because they just started just selling books, and nobody thought selling books was going to be like a multi-trillion, I guess, already dollar business. So what I see is that maybe artificial intelligence needs to be part of those very smaller things. I think it's already established in many ways, like proctoring in e-learning. Things like translation or automated captioning, we already have that. But I wonder if there are more niche use cases for AI that end up becoming like huge.
Totally possible. I have no idea. I'm not saying machine learning or artificial intelligence are beyond me or anything like that, but I personally don't put, I don't have enough, I have not put enough bandwidth into thinking about it. Kind of thinking about I guess mostly just because I always feel like the learning, but every time I write about personalization or we talk about personalization, so much of it is driven by AI or machine learning, right? And it looks like that magic. It's like, wait, how did the lesson or the teacher or the the bot or whatever know that was what I wanted to do next? And it's these algorithms can be pretty smart in that way. Interesting. Do we have any more design trends that you'd like to put on the table?
I think I have final one.
Ooh,
And I remember this is from Dr. Page, and that was the name that I was forgetting when
Aha.
she was talking about learning experience. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, but I forget the company. Anyway, she.
Well, she works for Learning Pool now.
That's it. So learning pool, it's all about this topic, learning in the flow of work. So a possible trend, I think this is relatively like far out compared to the other ones. And it's all companies, especially remote companies, they use like a complete set of tools for communication, productivity, and so on. So would the learning experiences could be somehow embedded into the other like productivity communications applications that are used within a company, or even like I mean, I see Slack sort of a social network, like internally of sorts. So there's always been this idea of social learning. So I wonder if maybe there would be some ideas where you can learn on Slack or on Gmail as you communicate, and it, it's an in-app experience in the flow of work, which it's an intriguing idea. But again, I think that among the ones that we discuss is the one that I don't see it as near in the pipeline.
I just think, it's interesting learning in the flow of work. We're getting better and better at it, but I still love the example. So many people ask us what we do for a living, right? What is e-learning and those kinds of things. And I say, e-learning is just this massive, huge spectrum of conversations, right? Because most people think of e-learning as the learning management system that they used in university, or they think about it's Google Classroom that their kids are using in elementary school, or those kinds of things. But every time you've sat there with a Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet and said, hey, how do I do that formula? Or how do I create a pivot table, or those kinds of things? And then you quickly search it on Google. You've just e-learned, right? You've just, that is also a part of it. And so learning in the flow of work here, what we're talking about, bringing that experience into whatever ecosystem you have, either as a, as a employee, sort of if you're working for the company, or as a community experience, so that as people go through, they get questions answered, or they're directed to certain topics or different groups and those kinds of things. Yeah, 100%. I mean, give me more if you ask me.
I mean, I hear you, and I agree. But now I'll throw you a curveball. Like, imagine you are, imagine you are the chief learning officer, and you actually want to encourage those kinds of things, like people learning something quickly on Google and start implementing it because it's good for productivity and so on. How can you as a CLO account for that? And how can you say, oh, our learners use Google in this sense and that led to this? How can you make that tangible from a C-suite perspective?
I completely understand. I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, if you were to have a learning experience, right, an LXP, rather than an LMS, right? That that sort of activity, all clicks and where you're going, whatnot, or that's being tracked, and that's being captured for that kind of analytical reporting, as well as the learning and the AI and whatnot behind it is necessary. But yeah, I agree. It's really hard. It's kind of like, how does the salesperson, attribute the sale, when it's been 15 conversations and, I networked over here and, oh, wait, that sale happened because I knew Sally from, a past job, and then we got connected, like that's the intangibility of, a really good salesperson. Right.
Right.
Trust in the process, Christian. That's what I would say. Trust in the process.
Okay.
Listen, I want to wrap this up. I want to remind everyone that Christian and we work for a company called Open LMS, and we would absolutely love to have you do two things. First, we want you to come join us for the eLearn Success Series. It's a series of 4 events that are happening across the year. One in February, one in May, one in July, and one in October. And as you can see here on your screen right now, you can get a free ticket to it. The February session on February 23rd is focused on designing effective and awesome learning experiences. Go pop over there to elearnsuccessseries.com and grab your ticket. And that one ticket will get you entry into all 4 of the sessions virtually. Chris and I, we've run the eLearning Success Summit 2 years prior to this, and we've had literally thousands and thousands of people. I mean, last year we had more than 8,000 people show up. It's a huge experience, and we'd really love for you to join us here. And the other thing is, as a part of that, come join us in our community. You can see at the bottom of the screen, or when you get your ticket, you'll be reminded community.openlms.net, or you can go to bit.ly/elearningcommunity.com, just eLearning Community, and join us. Again, thousands of professionals over there, interested, passionate, people sharing successes, challenges, answering questions and whatnot. We'd love to have you join us. Chris, thank you so much again today for our office hours. Really love it. We will. I'll see you tomorrow, man. I'll probably see you right after this. So have a great day.
You too. Bye, everyone.